let's review where we've been and then get into new material as we careen ever expeditiously to the conclusion of Luke's account. We saw Paul and Luke and Aristarchus with him. Paul is a political prisoner, and he is taken by a centurion onto a grain ship. He has left Caesarea. He is now embarking on a journey to Rome, where he is appealed to present his case before none other than Caesar himself. Leaving Caesarea, up to the coast of Sidon, up through the south coast of Asia Minor. This map takes us to the very westernmost point of Asia Minor. From there, they are blown off course. They go south to the island of Crete, where they are able to harbor in a place called Fair Havens, about the center south of the island of Crete. They realize that the time for traversing the Mediterranean is starting to pass them by. The calendar will wait for no man. And they make a decision that to winter in Fair Havens, right there at the center point of the south island, of the southern end of the island of Crete. That is not a wise move, so they make a less wise move to simply traverse 40 miles west along the coast of Crete to the port of Phoenix, which is their destination to winter. That's not their final destination. At just their destination to sit the winter out. It proves to be a colossal mistake. As they make their way 40 miles toward Phoenix, before very long, verse 14, they rush down from the land, a violent wind called the Euraquilo, and it pushes them south. Running under the shelter of a small island called Cauda, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. They fear being driven so far south that they wind up on the coast of North Africa. This is modern-day Libya. This is what was called the Syrtis. It is the infamous for shipwrecks. The shallows of the Syrtis will destroy ships, and that is what they fear. You see on the far left of the map, you see that island of Cauda. They are being driven toward the Syrtis, but a turn pushes them away from the Syrtis, and they are adrift in the midst of this central portion of the Mediterranean. They let down the sea anchor. That is it's like a parachute, except it goes on the water, right? This is a modern one. And in this way, it slows them down. Let themselves be driven along. It says, neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm was assailing us. In other words, a big honking storm was assailing us from then on. All hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. The power of the sea, the power of the storm. See, throughout the passage, there is the hope of salvation, the abandonment of that hope of salvation, the promise of salvation, the realization of that salvation. It depends on what you're trusting in. Are you trusting in a little sea anchor like this? You're trusting in the God who makes the storms, the God who makes the lightning. I'm not talking about Thor. I'm talking about the God who made the heavens and the earth. Your salvation, our salvation, is quite dependent upon the object of our trust. What or whom? Well, Paul gives a speech. Therefore, keep up your courage, men. I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. In other words, an angel came to Paul and told him that of the 276 crewmen and passengers and prisoners who were on board, soldiers, etc., none would be lost, but the ship will be completely lost. The ship will be lost, the cargo will be lost, the grain will be lost, everything will be lost, but the lives will be saved. But we must run aground on a certain island. This is far more than a 3-hour tour on which they're out. Right? The weather started getting rough. The not tiny ship, it was a substantial ship, was tossed. And I would like to be able to say, if not for the courage of the fearless crew, the ship would, but it's not the courage of the fearless crew. It is the providence and protection of our God. But when the 14th night came, as we were driven about in the Sea of Adria, Adria's sea, center of the Mediterranean, as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship, and I let down the ship's boat into the sea on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow. This is an interesting little subsection of the adventure at hand. We have a group of people who are desperate to be saved. Some of the sailors, the mariners, desperate to be saved. And so on the pretense of laying out anchors from the rear of the ship, they are trying to lower the ship's lifeboat, jump in and abandon ship, and try to escape. The people thought that their chances of being saved would be much stronger if they took matters into their own hand rather than trusting Paul's representation of God's word. To trust in your own cleverness versus the revelation of God himself is never a wise decision. It would be, in the words of Luke, no small mistake. In other words, a big honking giant mistake. But Paul said to the centurion, he sees this monkey business going on with the guys trying to escape under cover of letting down more anchors. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers who have swords, right? That's why he says to the guys with the swords, unless these men who are trying to escape right now, who are trying to get salvation on their own, from their own hands, unless these men, these cheaters, remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved. In other words, as we discussed earlier this morning regarding our Torah portion, we're all in this together. If one group abandons the other, the entire group is damaged by the actions of a few. Unless these men remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved. So the lives of 276 men depend on Paul breaking out his Praetorian guard, his Pauline guard, the centurion and the soldiers, and stopping the escape. The soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat, let it fall away. Now, if you were in the position of the guys trying to escape, who are seasoned sailors, no doubt, otherwise they would not have entrusted their lives to a lifeboat, a smaller boat than the ship in which they were in. The lifeboat, there was a wisdom to that because a lifeboat will sail higher on the water. So when you're trying to negotiate rocks and a rocky surface, a lifeboat will get you far closer to the land if it pushes you along to the shore than a ship would, which will get caught in the rocks, be busted up, and would break into pieces, which is going to be what happens to the ship. Spoiler alert. What is it like when someone cuts away your pathway of salvation? You put your trust in the lifeboat. It's called a lifeboat, for goodness sake. But when that which you trust for salvation is cut away from you, what happens to you? One of two things. Either you are myopic and you cannot see beyond that which you trusted, that inferior avenue of salvation, and you cannot see past it, and you abandon all hope because that which you put all your trust in is now cut away, dropped into the sea, forever unavailable to you as a vehicle of escape. That's one option. Option two is to trust in the only available alternative, which is the promise, the proclamation of a prisoner on board who has visions of angels, who tells you everything's going to be all right. Not for the ship, but for you, if you'll but trust in what I say. It's an interesting conundrum, because we like salvation to be something that we can feel, something that we can see, something that is within the realms of our limited imagination. I mean, practical people we are. But yet, there's the intangible, invisible God who made the heavens and the earth, who made the storm, who made the sea. It's more challenging sometimes to trust in that which we cannot touch with our hands, that which we cannot see with our eyes. But we can hear His word, and we can see, we can read His word. Whether or not to trust in that word as the means of our salvation, that's up to each one of us. Well, soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food. We read this last time. Today is the 14th day. It's been 2 weeks. Constantly watch and go without eating because everybody's nauseous, having taken nothing. Therefore, I encourage you to take some food. It is your preservation. There's going to be some swimming in your immediate future. You probably should get some protein, some carbohydrates for sure. Get some carbs in you. But not a hair of your head of any of you will perish. All of us in the ship were 276 persons. When they'd eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. Let's lighten the ship. We're going to lose the cargo anyway. Let's let the ship ride higher by getting rid of the dead weight. And now we see text that is new material for us. When the day came, they could not recognize the land. An unfamiliar land mass appeared. They had been driven 476 miles off course. I only wanted to go 40 miles, remember. But they've been driven 476 miles off course. They could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach. And they resolved to drive the ship onto it if they could. They decided to sacrifice the ship, in other words, by running it into the bay, getting as close to the beach as possible before the ship was run aground. That will require some speed. How are they going to get that speed? Casting off the anchors. They left them in the sea. All the dead weight. They're not going to need the anchors anymore. Get rid of the anchors. They left them in the sea. At the same time, they're loosening the ropes of the rudders. They loosened the controls of the directions, in other words. Can you advance that slide, please? Somehow it's stuck. Thank you. You'll notice that in the model of the ship, there are two rudders at the the back of the boat. You'll see the rudder that helps turn those two little things down on the bottom that helps turn the ship. They loosen them. They hoist up the sail to the wind, hoisting the foresail to the wind. They headed to the beach. The ship gathered momentum. As it gathered momentum toward the beach, they struck a reef. Striking a reef where two seas met, they ran the vessel aground. The prow stuck fast, remained immovable, but the stern began to be broken up by the force of the wind. So the front of the ship is stuck, but the power of the sea is pushing against the stern. What's going to happen when the front of the ship can't move and the back of the ship is being pushed by waves? It's not good for the ship. Ship is going to, the rear of the ship is going to start to disintegrate. The pounding force of the waves, ship begins to break up. The stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. Now the soldiers, they have a plan. Kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. Even in the midst of a storm, even in the midst of a shipwreck, the sense of duty that the soldiers had, plus the shame that would come to them if they survived. And since the prisoners, they know, Paul has said the prisoners are going to survive. Well, how are they going to face their superiors if the prisoners under their charge had escaped? Well, sir, there was a shipwreck. There were extenuating circumstances. That's a sword in the gut. That's not good. So the soldiers' plan, kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. So they're going to have a mass execution while the ship is disintegrating. But the centurion, remember his name is Julius, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention. Superior officer, knock it off, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. Guys, we can round up we're going to be stuck on an island for who knows how long. Let's round them up later. In the meantime, take off your armor, take off your, let's swim. Get to land, survive first, and then we'll track down those pesky prisoners. So the centurion wanted to bring Paul safely. They kept them from their intention. Commanded all those who should swim should jump overboard first, get to land. The rest should follow. Some on planks, floating on pieces of the ship, and others on various things from the ship. Whatever floats, hold on to it for dear life. And so it happened that they all were able to be brought safely to land. That is the power of the God whom Paul represented. Paul told all 276, God has communicated that all of you will be brought safely to land, and that is indeed what happens. What God says, what he promises, he brings to pass. That power far exceeds that which was manifest in the storm. When they had been brought safely through, we go back to the Luke, we found out that the island was called Malta. They stagger out of the pounding surf onto the beach, and they are going to be greeted by the residents of Malta, called the Maltese. This is where the Maltese falcon originates from, Malta, although it's a little bit earlier than the Maltese falcon. But nonetheless, this is the island of Malta, about 18 miles. Not top to bottom. Not a large island, not a substantial island, but nonetheless, one that is able to provide safety, security. The natives, this in Greek, the barbarians, and it's not that they were barbarous, it's just that if you were not from a city, if you were not part of the Roman Empire, you were considered to be a barbarian. Again, had nothing to do with their culture or their sophistication, simply denoted a foreigner who doesn't speak Greek or Latin. Maltese native tongue was something that was like a variation of Phoenician, right? And there would have been very few, if any, of those shipwrecked survivors who would have been facile and fluent in Phoenician. Greek and Latin would have been the languages of the soldiers, of the mariners, most likely. But there may have been some who spoke Phoenician. But nonetheless, what do you need to communicate when you're staggering in out of the cold sea, soggy and sodden? And so, nonetheless, the natives showed us extraordinary kindness. But because of the rain that had set in, because of the cold, they kindled a fire, a big bonfire, and received us all. The hospitality of the Maltese communicates far beyond language. That's the universal language of welcome. Now, following such a taxing ordeal, one would assume that a man of Paul's age, who by this point is about 54 years old, younger than I myself, that this guy would have collapsed at the age of 54, coming through a shipwreck, eating one meal in 2 weeks, beaten, battered by the waves. He would have collapsed into a spent puddle on the sand. Not so. Luke tells us that Paul does his part to keep that beautiful, welcoming bonfire going. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, feeding the fire, gathered a bundle of sticks, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened itself onto his hand. Now, we're not talking about this kind of viper. That's, again, an anachronism. We're talking about this kind of viper that fastened itself onto his hand. Poisonous! How could Paul, I know his eyesight isn't what it used to be as a young man, but how do you mistake a big giant viper for a stick? Because cold blood, it gets stiff from the cold. It's very cold, it's very wet, and this thing stiffened up, and Paul mistook it gathering sticks, gathering branches, and he added it to the fire, and once thrown to the fire, the viper in a panic sprang to life, latched onto Paul's hand. Ow! Imagine the Maltese observing Paul standing there with a viper dangling by his fangs in his hand. What would they have thought? Well, when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they began saying to one another, undoubtedly this man is a murderer. And though he has been saved from the sea, justice, karma, in other words, has not allowed him to live. The man had cheated death by surviving the storm, the waves, the shipwreck, but justice got him, and he's receiving his just deserts for his crime. The Maltese kept their eyes on Paul, waiting for him to keel over from the bite of the viper. Well, they're going to be disappointed in that. However, he, Paul, shook the creature off into the fire, and suffered no harm. But they were expecting that he was about to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But to their astonishment, they observed that he's completely unaffected by the viper's poison. The hand doesn't even swell up. It doesn't even turn colors. And so they conclude he's a god. They jump from one assumption to another, both of which were mistaken. After they waited a long time, they'd seen nothing unusual happen to him. They changed their minds. Okay, so he's not a bad guy that the gods are. Now, maybe he himself is a god. Okay, that makes much more sense. And this is not the first time that a group of people had assumed that Paul was a god. Remember, this happens during the first missionary journey back in chapter 14 when Paul and Barnabas go to Lystra and they worship them as gods. There's no indication that the Maltese attempt to worship the apostle, maybe just that they keep their distance. Now, in the neighborhood of that place were lands, property, in other words, belonging to the leading man of the island, named Publius. Publius. Now, this is the only way I can make sense of a prisoner. Paul's a prisoner, and he winds up being welcomed into the hospitality of the leading man of the island, Publius. The only way I can figure it as having happened is that the Maltese thought he was a god. He was supernatural, and so his star rose, was in ascension, and their estimation of him brought them to invite them into the home of Publius, the leading man of the island, the first man of the island in the original text. He welcomed us and entertained us courteously 3 days. These are the ruins of what may well have been Publius's domicile. It was a lot fancier back then, I can promise you. A lot more impressive back then. But Paul and his friends, Luke and Aristarchus, were invited by Publius to enjoy his estate as their guests 3 days. It happened. And the father of Publius was lying in bed, afflicted with recurrent fever, and dysentery. This is known as Malta fever, right? Similar to malaria. Luke's a doctor, and Paul could be a god. So Paul went in to see him, and Luke didn't have any medicine with him, lost in the storm. But Paul went in, and after he had prayed, he laid his hands on him. and he healed him. Instantaneously healing him through prayer, laying on of hands. After this happened, people already thought Paul was pretty special. The rest of the people on the island who had diseases were coming to him and getting cured. That's one way of filling up your social calendar pretty quickly, right? It's going to stay 3 months while they're there on the island, and Paul didn't want for any social activity. Remember, however, that language is still somewhat of a problem, but if someone is healed and someone's grateful, that goes beyond linguistic facility and is a universal communicator. But Luke doesn't describe the evangelistic result of all this activity, but he does communicate the high level of esteem, the generosity that the Maltese extended to Paul and his companions throughout their stay, their gratefulness, their gratitude rather. They also honored us with many marks of respect. And when they were setting sail, they supplied us all we needed. Now, just by way of a side note, Paul's companions, Luke and Aristarchus, were both believers. Neither of them was God's chosen instrument of healing. I want to remind you yet again, as I've reminded you throughout the text, that when we see miraculous healing, it is always invariably done at the hands of an apostle or a very close apostolic associate, a legate, if you will, one who was delegated authority directly from an apostle. Well, but certainly, of course, Luke's medical knowledge would have proven useful in substantiating the healings. But the supernatural activity with Publius' father and with all those who came with diseases and problems would have definitely powerfully authenticated Paul the Apostle's message to the Maltese, however basic it was, basically it was communicated. So we've seen now a level of high adventure that we've really not seen before in the book of Acts. This is worthy of any classic sea novel that we may have read. And it stands in strong contrast to the fact that Paul spent 2 years in sedentary imprisonment from 57 to 59. But Luke's purpose was not to vary the narrative and shake things up a bit, but was to emphasize that God can be trusted. God had promised to conduct Paul safely to Rome, and Paul has indeed not arrived in Rome yet, but he has survived an assassination attempt after assassination attempt and a shipwreck. Insurmountable obstacles that placed him in peril in his ability to fulfill the destiny that God had promised him. But there was no way that if God has a purpose for Paul or for any of us, there is no way that God's purpose can be frustrated. Not by assassination attempt, not by crowds, not by riots, not by arrests, not by imprisonment, and certainly not by shipwreck and storm, not by viper bites, whether he's facing shipwreck, arrest, poisonous snake bites. Paul overcame all life-threatening dangers. That is for us, the reader, to conclude that there is no doubt that Paul will stand trial before the Emperor Nero, Caesar himself, in Rome. Well, let's get them on the mainland of Italy, and then we can call it a day for right now. At the end of 3 months, the winter months, in other words, was now the end of February, we set sail. This would be February 60. We set sail on an Alexandrian ship which had wintered at the island. This is a ship of like size. You see it has a figurehead of a swan on its mast. This is not the ship, and not a representation of the ship. They have a different figurehead, as we'll see momentarily, which had the twin brothers for its figurehead. So this one has a swan. They would have had the twin brothers for its figurehead right there at the front of the ship. Well, maybe not these guys. These are Castor and Pollux are the are the twin brothers. So Julius books passage once again for himself, his soldiers, his prisoners on a ship bound for Rome. And Castor and Pollux, by the way, they are good luck. They are gods of travel. They're it's like having a St. Christopher medal. You know, some people put the St. Christopher medal on their car because it protects your car, protects your driving. Well, this is the idea, okay, that the Castor and Pollux are the patron gods of sailors. And so Julius is taking no chances, taking an extra measure of precaution just to get from Malta to the mainland. After we put in at Syracuse, not the university, but actually the tip of Sicily, where all good godfathers come from. After we put in at Syracuse, we stayed there for 3 days, loading, unloading cargo, perhaps awaiting calmer weather, being a little bit cautious. They sail another 80 miles from Syracuse. From there, we sailed around and arrived at Rhegium. And a day later, a south wind sprang up. That's pretty good. They're on the toe of Italy, and a south wind springs up. The second day, we came to Puteoli. All these slides are actually the places that are being mentioned here in case you thought I was just putting pictures of South Texas or something in the mix. These are really the places that they're looking in. They're now on this final leg of their voyage, Puteoli, in the Bay of Naples. So they have traveled from Malta, the island that is south of Sicily. They go up from Syracuse to the tip of the toe of Italy. Rhegium, the south wind blows, and they sail up to Naples, to Napoli, to the port of Puteoli, and there they can disembark. Here's another picture for you if that helps you to imagine. They are going to be going from the port of Puteoli up along the western end of Italy to Rome itself. There we found some brethren in Puteoli. We're invited to stay with them for 7 days. Sounds good, right? Enjoy some hospitality. Did you know there was a church in Puteoli? Well, now you do. And Paul and his companions, Luke and Aristarchus, and the soldiers who were guarding them, got some wonderful hospitality for a full week, and they've only got now to travel 140 miles by land from Naples or Puteoli to Rome. They set out from Puteoli along the 18-foot wide Via Appia, the Appian Way. It's the straightest and most venerable of roads. It's an interesting thing because we now that Paul's actually now on the mainland of Italy. He's never been there before. And we know from his writings that he has desired to come to Rome for many years now. Always had plans to come to Rome for many years. And finally, Paul is going to be in Rome. In Romans 15, for this reason, I've often been prevented from coming to you. But now, this is what he's writing from Corinth on the way he's going to be going down to Jerusalem. This is back in 57, right? So going back 2 years, Paul knows he's going back to Jerusalem. And right from Jerusalem for Pentecost, he intends to go on another missionary journey, a fourth missionary journey. Of course, the riot, 57, in 57 in the temple, intervened. His imprisonment for 2 years in Caesarea Maritima interfered with his plans. But now he's arriving finally to Rome. I've often been prevented from coming to you, and now I've been prevented, and how I've been prevented. But now with no further place for me in these regions, since I have for many years a longing to come to you whenever I go to Spain, because Paul had ambition to go as far west in the Roman Empire as he possibly could, which was Spain. I hope to see you in passing, and to be helped on my way there by you, when I have first enjoyed your company for a while. In other words, I expect some support from you while I am there with you. I'll bless you, you bless me. Therefore, when I finish this and put my seal on this fruit of theirs, I will go on by way of you to Spain. When I leave Judea, when I leave Jerusalem, I will come to you. Delayed, yes, I know. I know that when I come to you, I will come in the fullness of the blessing of the Messiah, of the Christ. So, from Puteoli, we are taking the road northwest. We are on the road, the Appian Way, and we see Rome at the very top corner. That is the goal, that is the way, that is the travelogue. And the brethren, when they heard about us, came from there as far as the market of Appius on the Appian Way, and the 3 inns to meet us. Now, this is the area of the market of Appius. It's changed a little bit, but nonetheless, this is the area where they came to meet them, spend some time. And the 3 taverns, and this is the archaeological, at least it's a sign that says this is the archaeological site of the Tres Taverne, the 3 taverns mentioned here in the book of Acts where Paul was. And that is the Appian Way. Still there today. When Rome built roads, they built them to last. You can walk the Appian Way even today, or at least portions of it. And when Paul saw them, he thanked God. He took courage. So we have enthusiastic representatives of the Roman church coming to meet Paul and his companions at 2 resting points along the Appian Way. How encouraging. Maybe Priscilla and Aquila were part of the welcoming party. And Paul saw them, this personal escort provided to Paul and his companions, and it causes him to thank God. And it instills further courage. It's not that Paul was without courage. We've seen he has courage and how he has courage. But this instills even greater levels, super levels of courage in Paul as he thanks God. These are the mile markers. Now, we all have mile markers in our lives as we travel, maybe not the Appian Way, but as we travel the road of our lives, on our way to our destination, wherever it may be. The question is, as you travel the road of life, broad, well paved as it is, will you walk alone? Will you take comfort and encouragement in the presence of other believers? Will you allow them to come and walk along beside you and strengthen you so that you may thank God for their presence in your life and you may take courage? My friends, for the foreseeable future, as far as I can see, I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I can read the news. And the world in which we move and live is a world that requires courage. And no one can walk the Appian way of our lives and our destiny alone. It's dangerous. It's discouraging. Fraught with unseen dangers. But if we walk together, we can mutually encourage one another. We can mutually instill in one another courage. I'm reminded of the four friends in that magnificent scholarly film, The Wizard of Oz, as they enter into the palace of the wizard and how they are trembling, but they are, with the exception of the cowardly lion who eventually has enough and dives out the window. But they are able to give one another courage as they take step by step closer and closer, not knowing what they are about to face, what the wizard's going to be like. And when they finally see the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, at least his effects, it is indeed terrifying. But the friends give one another courage, and they urge one another on so that each one of them can fulfill the destiny that has been put upon their lives. We need one another. This is no time to be alone. This is no time to go your own way. This is a time for us to walk, a time for us to begin with nice little programs, smart programs, really, like the buddy system that we're putting in place, we've put in place here. And going forward to be able to live our lives, not just touching base with one another every Saturday over a 20-minute bagel and coffee. Not just being within the vicinity of one another as we sing praises to our God and hear a message from the Word of God. This is a time for us to invest step by step in each other's lives. I know there are obstacles and geographic obstacles and time obstacles and all kinds of impediments for us to function as a strong family, a mishpucha, a body. But I think it's required. In the world in which we now live, move, and breathe, we need one another more than ever. Well, let's leave our passage for today. Paul will enter Rome next week, I promise, as we embark on our final two messages in the book of Acts. Now, let me tell you, we're going to have two more messages in the book of Acts, chapter 28, and then we are going to do a long overdue open line Saturday, where we're going to talk, we're going to have an open mic, and we're going to talk. I'm going to solicit your feedback, first of all, as to what you learned, what insights you gleaned from the book of Acts, what you saw, what you felt. Because we have made over a year investment in the book of Acts. We started late spring last year. So we've been over a year in the book of Acts. So it is my assumption and my hope that you have learned something, that you have grown, that you have that the book has engaged you. And I would like to hear testimony to that end. I also want to answer any questions in the book of Acts that arose that we passed over, or maybe you weren't here for the first half of the book of Acts and you didn't see the setup, you weren't here for the setup, and there are some things that are confusing to you. If there's anything that you've questioned, open line Saturday, we're going to do. And then once we decompress from the book of Acts, we're going to open it up to any other questions regarding God, faith, our walk, the Bible, Israel, anything that you have a question about. We're going to do. That's what 3 weeks from now is going to be about. Okay? We're going to have an open mic, open line Saturday. And it's going to all depend on your participation, how successful it could be. A very short time, or it could be a satisfying and truly engaged. The open line Saturdays that we've had in the past have all been really, I think, just tremendous, and we've all benefited from it. So I want to make sure before we move on to our new series that we are going to be able to leave this one behind in good stead. So, having said that, we have some announcements.